Blog number 7. Sisyphus Sunrise. Warning, contains topics of depression and suicide. This has easily been the hardest blog to write so far. There's been a few different drafts that were going to either talk about the making of the new album, or chronicling the album release shows, or describing the relief of finishing a personal 5-year project. But every attempt felt woefully unauthentic. I'd stop halfway through with a draft with a heavy sigh, stare out the window for a while before eventually deciding it's better to delete the whole lot. A whole lot of epiphanoffs going on, one after another. The album had some weighty subject matter that I felt took a whole lifetime to express, so reflecting back on it should have been a relief where I could have taken a rest and taken new ideas for where to go next. But instead, I found myself staring directly at my depression that's been present for most of my life, and I've been trying to get on by a day-by-day basis without sinking into the mire. I'm writing this because I guested on the Spoken Metal Show podcast. I enjoy binging a lot of these episodes exclusively on long coach journeys because Coop, the host, has an infectious enthusiasm for the Merseyside metal scene that sets me up with positivity on my way to a gig. I've been on the show twice before briefly on 2 Metal to the Masses episodes, and it's been great fun rattling away with excitement about the show at hand. This is usually the case with most of my on-air interviews, as I'm either flying high on adrenaline or, on one slightly embarrassing occasion, very, very drunk, like the Moshville Times YouTube interview. I was generously given time on Coop's show to talk about my stand-up comedy, the shows I help organise with Born to Lose Productions, and the new Mad Spanner album, Sisyphus Happy. But this time, I was on a video call from my Welsh village environment, far away from the scene and in the midst of a heavy depression. Sure enough, our conversation started with buoyancy, but when I started to talk about how much live music meant to me and talking frankly about the new album's main theme, I felt the weight of the conversation got much heavier. I felt like it was going to be very difficult to raise the conversation back again to the usual mad spanner patter when the hyperactivity I'm known for seemed to give way to fatigue. I knew the topics of depression and suicide were going to get brought up, but I was still underprepared for exposing my day-to-day depression on air with the added exhaustion to my cadence. I tend to go through many tangential adventures in conversation anyway, but the topic of depression, I felt like there was more scattershot than usual. It was really uncomfortable to nail down what the hell this feeling even is without getting lost in a quagmire with seemingly no end in sight. And the funny thing is, listening back on the podcast, I don't even sound like how I felt at the time at all. Sure, I'm not 200 miles per hour, but I certainly don't sound exhausted. I was engaged in the conversation throughout as we covered many topics from the importance of live music to Lemmy. I don't sound depressed, even though in that conversation I felt crushed by it. What I'm trying to show here is how invisible this can be. The blog isn't a pity party nor a cry for help. I hope to describe my own melancholy and let other people with invisible illnesses know that they aren't alone, because depression can be really good at fooling you that you are, always were, and always will be. I've never been a happy person. Happiness is a fleeting, transient experience, often noticed in hindsight, but even then I struggle to find a time when I've been happy for more than half a day. I'm elated at concerts and festivals, however. People often ask me where I get my energy from. Well, it's not drugs, for those wondering. And I can honestly say for me that it's a knee-jerk response to get away from the mire, the grey, the void, the empty, the nothing, as much as possible. That's also true to my approach to creative pursuits to a point where this constant escapism makes me feel utterly delusional at times. My emotional range feels like a flat line, so the passionate energy for live music or creating art is like a jumpstart to an engine on the fritz. Happiness for me feels like either a comforting day of non-resistance or when I'm hyper-focused on productivity or learning. But otherwise, I'm stuck with this dreadful melancholia that just won't fuck off. I first felt suicidal at 17 after moving into a bedsit with the help of a social worker and was diagnosed with depression soon after. I was on increasing amounts of medication that didn't mix well with the amphetamines, benzodiazepines, dissociatives and hallucinogenics I was also taking in my late teens. I dissociated and began living in personas to fit in, which led to a psychotic break in university in my early 20s. Everything was so rich in colour. I could hear the hidden messages of the world reveal themselves to me. I believed I was the god of space and time and alienated everyone with my wild fanaticism. I felt every minute of the day with such intensity, even in my sleep where I had such vivid and lucid dreams of the apocalypse. One was an expressionless doll floating desolate on the watercolour ocean's surface, looking back at a distant charcoal city under the sky entirely ablaze with the most beautiful crimson that burned into my memory. If it wasn't for my friends who rescued me under the guise of a surprise road trip, I would have certainly been sectioned. The following breakdown, deconstruction and rebuilding of my life took a few years. I was put on a new medication that not only destroyed all of my drive, but also spooked me with out-of-body hallucinations. It shook me enough to quit all drugs cold turkey, legal and otherwise, so I could find what my default state was. Even my favourite, booze. Everything was given up other than my ferocious chain-smoking habit at the time. Instead of wallowing at the end of my theatrical explorations in uni, I later decided I was wasting time not working on another way to perform on stage, through music. No time to waste. I became obsessed with learning different instruments, and Mad Spanish shortly became something I was genuinely excited about for the first time in years. As the project came to an end and the demo was released, I was suicidal when the excitement I had for this project was met with complete indifference to the outside world. I've since done away with the need for external validation when it comes to art. I mean, if someone does art deep in the woods and no one's there to appreciate it, is that person still an artist? I think so, which informs me to focus on the process rather than if other people care of its popularity. Then things became so much more positive. The band was formed, we played plenty of shows, and we released the Life Absurd album. I had some of the best times of my life in that period, booking shows and meeting new people across England and Wales. When I noticed the patterns of thought that would inevitably spiral downwards, I became able to stop myself feeding into it, and eventually stop becoming suicidal altogether, which took a lot of practice. After about a decade, the worst of it was finally over. When Sisyphus Happy released, I felt like the boulder was at the foot of the mountain again after another project ended. It was the worst depression I felt in a very long time that made me consider going back on medication as it was affecting my diet and my work. But after many rewrites of this blog over the past 3 months, I can say that the black cloud has finally passed and the metaphorical boulder is being pushed again with all the love and passion I have for living. The resolution of the album still holds true, and I know that when the black dog, the black cloud, the falling boulder, or whatever you want to call it, comes back round again, I have this 5-year project to remind me of the importance of perseverance, and that the worst will pass, and that the melancholia can fuel the creative drive going forward. Not everyone who suffers from depression has the creative drive, so I can only speak for myself there. But every time I perform on stage, I get so much catharsis from channeling all that internal struggle that I hope people can share some of that release vicariously. A Mad Spanish show is a celebration of life, and I know invisible illnesses exist in every single crowd. I want those people to be included in that celebration too. It's a long blog, both in the making and in the reading. Thank you, and have a happy new year, whatever that looks like. Thank you.